Do you even know who you're talking to? Emily Whitman's voice cut through the golden light of the mansion's grand ballroom, a laugh tucked at the edge that made every guest glance up, curiosity flickering in their eyes as they followed the direction of her gaze toward the young black waitress, Lisa Johnson, who paused mid-step with a tray of crystal glasses, her dark eyes steady, unflinching, absorbing every glint of chandelier light bouncing off the polished marble floors. The room hummed with the soft murmur of socialites, the clinking of silverware, and the low undertone of classical strings drifting from the corner quartet. But Emily's tone carved a silence around Lisa, a sphere where every subtle shift, her braid catching a stray reflection, the dusting of flour from her apron, was amplified, noticed, and magnified under the scrutiny of the elite. Lisa's hands tightened slightly around the tray, but she did not bow her head, did not flinch, because she had spent years reading the rhythms of high society from the margins, learning how every laugh, every step, every glance carried meaning far beyond its surface. And tonight, as the whispers of the room curled toward her like smoke, she felt the pulse of anticipation, the weight of a secret she had uncovered, resting in the folds of the legal folder she had accidentally knocked to the floor. Moments earlier, edges peeking out beneath Emily's stilettos. Guests shifted, a woman in a sapphire dress muttering under her breath, a man adjusting his cufflinks as if to steady himself against an unseen tremor, but all eyes were drawn back to Lisa as she bent to retrieve the folder, careful, deliberate, her movements measured but fluid, a dance of competence and calm in a sea of judgment and expectation. Emily's smirk faltered just enough to reveal a flicker of unease, an almost imperceptible tightening of her jaw, and Lisa, sensing the perfect timing, allowed herself the faintest exhale of control, her gaze moving from the polished brass doorknob to the glimmering crystal chandeliers above, aware that the eyes of the mansion, every chandelier and mirrored wall, were witnesses to this collision of worlds, wealth and service, privilege and insight, poised to pivot at the slightest nudge. The hush deepened, a tangible entity, hanging between the laughter that had not yet fully ceased and the murmurs that were trying to start, a silence pregnant with possibility, every tick of the ornate grandfather clock echoing in Lisa's ears like a drumbeat counting down to revelation. And in that pause, she imagined the story that could unfold, the revelation waiting in the folds of that forgotten folder, a truth that could not be ignored, that demanded the attention of Emily Whitman and every socialite assembled. And with one careful step, Lisa straightened, lifting the folder so the top page caught the soft glow of candlelight, and as she whispered, barely audible yet impossibly commanding, "Miss Whitman, I believe this clause changes everything." The room collectively leaned in, the murmurs died, the music seemed to hold its breath, and in that frozen tableau, the tiniest shift of perspective had begun, setting the stage for the unraveling of assumptions, the subtle dance of power about to be rewritten under the eyes of those who had believed themselves untouchable. Lisa Johnson adjusted the strap of her apron and took a slow breath, letting her eyes scan the expanse of the mansion's ballroom, every polished surface reflecting the soft glow of chandeliers like tiny stars suspended in crystal. She could feel the subtle tension ripple through the crowd, the whispers from guests brushing against her ears as if carried on invisible currents, every eye measuring her every movement, every tilt of her head. And yet she remained steady, her posture deliberate, unshakable, a quiet statement of presence in a world that had often ignored her existence. She remembered the early mornings scrubbing floors, the careful balancing of trays along the corridors, the countless times she had observed the wealthy inhabitants from the edges of the rooms, noting how decisions were made, how authority manifested in gestures and words, how a single misplaced step or phrase could alter the course of conversation. And tonight that awareness was her anchor. Emily Whitman's gaze flicked to her again, sharp, searching, a mixture of curiosity and irritation in her eyes. But Lisa did not waver. She allowed a small, controlled smile to tug at her lips, not from amusement, but from a confidence born of knowledge, of preparation, of insight. The guests shifted in their positions, adjusting their drinks, fanning themselves with programs from the evening's gala, yet all attention remained riveted on the small, poised figure holding the folder, the quiet storm at the center of the room. Lisa's fingers lingered over the edges of the document, feeling the texture of the paper, the subtle indentation of printed letters, each line containing more than words, but potential, leverage, truth waiting to be acknowledged. And she spoke again, her voice soft yet clear, cutting through the low hum. If this section is signed without review, the transfer of property rights is not secure. It allows for immediate reversal. A collective intake of breath rippled through the crowd, and even Emily's confident mask faltered, a subtle hitch in her breath betraying uncertainty. Lisa's heart remained steady, matching the rhythm she had practiced countless times before in quiet moments of preparation and observation. She allowed her gaze to meet Emily's directly, neither shrinking nor bowing, just a measured assertion of authority grounded not in wealth, but in clarity and competence. Every detail of the ballroom, the glint of glass, the reflective surfaces of the polished floor, the ornate moldings along the ceiling, seemed to heighten the intensity, each reflection echoing the weight of the moment, magnifying the stakes, while the murmurs of the guests receded into a tense hush, the room holding its breath with her, waiting for the next movement, the next word, the small pivot upon which everything might turn. And Lisa stepped forward ever so slightly, allowing the light to catch her face, illuminating a quiet resolve, a presence that had always been underestimated. And as she presented the folder fully toward Emily, the tip of the corner catching the glow from the chandelier above, the entire ballroom seemed suspended, the music barely audible, the air thick with anticipation, and Lisa Johnson, in that precise, measured moment, was no longer just the young waitress in a mansion full of privilege. She was the axis upon which the attention, the judgment, and the impending revelation balanced, poised to shift everything in the blink of an eye. Emily Whitman's eyes widened slightly as she leaned back against the carved oak table, her fingers tapping lightly in an unconscious rhythm as she studied Lisa Johnson, realizing for the first time that the young waitress was not just delivering drinks or performing her duties. She was observing, calculating, interpreting every nuance of the contracts, the conversations, the tiny shifts in body language among the guests. And this insight was delivered with a poise that belied her years in her station. The room seemed to hold its breath, the crystal chandeliers casting fractured light across polished surfaces, glinting off gold-rimmed glasses and mirrors that multiplied the tension, while Lisa's movements were precise, her gestures deliberate, the folder held in one hand steady, her voice measured yet carrying an unmistakable authority as she began outlining the implications of the clause she had discovered, articulating the risk and the hidden leverage with a clarity that left the socialites exchanging glances and adjusting their stances. In discomfort, guests shifted in their chairs, some leaning forward, others clutching flutes of champagne, but all silent, as if they instinctively understood that the narrative of the evening had changed. Every whispered assumption about hierarchy, about who could speak and who must listen, was now suspended in the air, waiting to be corrected. Lisa's gaze met Emily's steadily, neither challenging nor apologetic, simply presenting the truth with an elegance born of intellect and careful observation, the words slicing through the layers of etiquette, expectation, and social performativity that had dominated the room for decades, and the subtle tension between privilege and insight vibrated in every corner, bouncing off gilded frames, tall windows, and the polished marble floors. Emily's smile faltered into a thin line, the usual ease of dominance replaced by an abrupt awareness that she had misjudged the situation, the measure of her control now challenged in real time by a presence she had overlooked for too long. Lisa continued to articulate the precise mechanics of the clause, highlighting the unintended consequences that would unfold if it were signed without amendment, and every word was absorbed, registered, and weighed by those assembled, the hush growing heavier, the air dense with anticipation, while the small details, the tilt of Lisa's head, the steady cadence of her voice, the slight flare of her nostrils as she spoke, magnified the gravity of her message. The socialite's posture straightened, tension creeping into the elegant lines of her frame as she realized the authority she assumed over the room, and the mansion was no longer absolute, that her dismissal and derision of Lisa could not erase the competence and insight the young woman brought forward, and in that suspended moment, The power dynamic shifted imperceptibly yet irrevocably, leaving every guest aware that the evening had taken an unexpected turn, that the hierarchy they had assumed was now under quiet but undeniable interrogation, and Lisa Johnson, poised and composed, remained the center of the room's attention, the holder of knowledge that could alter outcomes and redefine influence, while Emily Whitman, her expression caught between disbelief and reluctant respect, finally allowed herself to see the depth and precision of the young waitress who had so effortlessly upended expectations. Lisa Johnson took a deliberate step forward, letting the folder rest lightly against her hip as her gaze swept across the room, noting the subtle shifts in posture among the guests, the small widening of eyes, the tilt of heads, the faint whispering that was now subdued under the weight of attention. She spoke with a measured cadence, each word precise, articulating the nuances of the clause she had discovered, the implications for ownership, and the potential reversals that could occur if the agreement were executed without correction, and the hush that fell over the room deepened, stretching the space between the polished tables and glimmering crystal, every corner of the mansion now holding the echoes of her assertion. Emily Whitman's face tightened, a flicker of tension passing over the carefully maintained expression, and she took a slow breath, realizing that dismissing Lisa's observation could carry consequences far beyond personal embarrassment, that the young waitress's careful reading, her knowledge, and her clarity could not be ignored, and for a fleeting moment the veneer of social dominance cracked, revealing a sharp awareness that authority in this space was no longer absolute. Lisa's movements were fluid yet deliberate, lifting the folder just enough to let the candlelight highlight the critical lines, her voice calm, but carrying an authority that demanded focus. The section regarding property transfer contains language that allows immediate control shift if signed without amendment. It is not merely procedural, it dictates the actual sequence of ownership and the rights attached. And the room collectively inhaled, the soft clinking of glasses and low murmurs, fading as attention centered solely on her, the weight of the revelation pressing into every polished surface, reflecting in mirrors and windows, magnifying the intensity of the moment. Guests leaned slightly forward, whispers halted mid-syllable, eyes following Lisa's movements as she stepped smoothly across the polished marble floor, the sound of her shoes muted against the vast expanse, the balance of grace and authority commanding an unspoken respect, and even Emily, who had previously radiated control and confidence, now found herself recalibrating, acknowledging the insight and composure of the young woman who had quietly observed the mansion for weeks and had now emerged at the perfect moment with a truth that demanded acknowledgment. The chandeliers overhead caught the edges of the folder, casting fragmented light that danced across Lisa's determined expression, every line of her face illuminated, revealing focus, clarity, and a quiet resilience that had been honed through years of attention to detail and patient observation. And in that moment, the tension crystallized, a tangible force that bound every guest in the ballroom to the gravity of her presence and the significance of the words she spoke, holding them suspended. Between expectation and revelation, between authority assumed and authority proven, while Lisa's voice continued with a steady rhythm, articulating each nuance and implication without faltering, her confidence radiating across the room, every guest, including Emily, sensing that the hierarchy they had relied upon was now subject to reconsideration. The quiet assertion of knowledge and competence standing at the center, ready to shift the course of the evening, the mansion, and the perception of power itself, leaving all who watched with a suspended awareness that the night had irrevocably changed and that the young waitress, poised and deliberate, held the subtle but undeniable leverage in her hands. Emily Whitman's composure wavered as Lisa Johnson continued to present the details of the clause, her voice steady, clear, and unwavering, each word cutting through the murmurs and soft music that had previously filled the grand ballroom. And for the first time, Emily felt the weight of the room shift, a subtle but undeniable change in attention from socialites and guests alike toward the young waitress who had quietly observed every nuance of the household for weeks. The polished marble floors reflected fragmented light from the crystal chandeliers, scattering small prisms across Lisa's face, highlighting the determination in her dark eyes, the measured set of her shoulders, the way her hands held the folder with quiet authority. Whispers spread like currents among the guests, voices lowered as they leaned forward in their chairs, each trying to understand how someone so young, so seemingly unassuming, could command the focus of a room filled with wealth and influence. Emily's lips pressed into a thin line, the usual confidence replaced by a flicker of uncertainty, her fingers tightening lightly on the edge of the table as she realized the implications of ignoring the information Lisa had uncovered. The socialites, who had been chuckling moments before now, exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the imbalance of knowledge and control, feeling the tension rise with each precise and deliberate word Lisa spoke, explaining potential reversals, the immediate risks, and the hidden authority that the clause could trigger. Lisa stepped slightly closer, not aggressively but with careful purpose, the rhythm of her speech calm, yet undeniable, drawing the room into a suspended focus where even the smallest movements, a tilt of the head, a shift in stance, were magnified, observed, and absorbed by everyone present. Emily's hand hovered over the folder she had been holding, the first trace of hesitation appearing in the subtle narrowing of her eyes, and a quiet tension filled the space as Lisa continued, outlining exactly how the transfer of ownership could be impacted and who would hold power if the agreement were executed without review. The air in the room felt dense, as if it had condensed around Lisa's presence, and the murmurs had completely faded, replaced by a collective silence that allowed every individual to register the full gravity of the moment, every polished surface, every reflection amplifying the drama unfolding. Emily's posture shifted imperceptibly, a subtle step back, a slight loosening of her previously controlled expression, revealing that she recognized the accuracy and significance of Lisa's words, and the guests, sensing the subtle reversal, adjusted in their seats, some leaning forward, some gripping the edge of the table, all captivated by the sudden inversion of authority and the demonstration of insight and composure from a person who had been underestimated by the entire room. Lisa's calm presence, her deliberate clarity, and the unfolding revelation held the attention of everyone, creating a moment suspended between expectation and realization, the mansion itself seeming to pause in acknowledgment of the quiet power she wielded through knowledge, observation, and impeccable timing, while Emily, finally confronting the truth, absorbed the unexpected authority in front of her, a recognition that the hierarchy she had relied upon was being quietly, yet definitively, challenged. Lisa Johnson took a slow step back, letting the folder rest gently against her hip as she allowed the room to breathe, the soft glow of chandeliers reflecting off the polished marble floors and tall windows bathing her in warm, fragmented light. The guests remained still, the murmurs and shifting of chairs fading into an almost tangible silence that hung over the grand ballroom, every individual caught in the suspended moment, their attention fixed on the young woman who had transformed a seemingly ordinary evening into a tableau of tension, awareness, and revelation. Her eyes scanned the room, noting the subtle shifts in posture, the almost imperceptible tightening of fingers on armrests, the way heads tilted slightly forward to catch the nuances of her measured words, and she allowed herself a quiet exhale, a pause to absorb the calm she had cultivated amidst the storm of attention. The contrast of her modest uniform against the opulence surrounding her emphasizing the gravity of her presence. The faint music from the corner quartet hung in the background, muted beneath the collective focus, and even the flicker of candle flames seemed to slow, each reflection highlighting the careful lines of her face, the steady cadence of her breathing, the deliberate poise she maintained in the eye of scrutiny. Emily Whitman's gaze lingered on her, a mixture of awe and uncertainty crossing her features as she slowly recognized the weight of what had been revealed, the subtle authority Lisa commanded not through status or wealth, but through preparation, insight, and calm decisiveness. Guests leaned slightly forward in their chairs, breath held, eyes wide, as though the mansion itself had hushed, the polished floors and gilded moldings acting as witnesses to the quiet power radiating from a single individual who had long been underestimated. Lisa allowed herself to pause fully, letting the room take in the stillness, the quiet authority, the undeniable presence she carried without arrogance or aggression, her gaze soft but unwavering, acknowledging Emily's unspoken recognition, the subtle nod of comprehension that passed between them, the realization that hierarchy could be unsettled by knowledge, clarity, and courage. The air seemed heavier, rich with anticipation and reflection, and the sound of distant footsteps from staff attending to the periphery of the room faded into near silence, leaving only the soft rustle of fabrics, the gentle clinking of glass as a guest adjusted a drink, and the rhythmic, deliberate inhalations and exhalations of those who had witnessed the shift. Lisa's posture remained perfect, her head held high, eyes steady, fingers lightly grazing the edge of the folder, and in that cinematic pause, the room seemed to expand and contract with the weight of possibility, the quiet before a revelation fully settled, the subtle suspense hanging on the precise alignment of observation, timing, and poised authority, every reflection, every mirrored panel, every flicker of light amplifying the calm intensity she projected, leaving the socialites and guests alike suspended in a shared recognition that the evening's events had pivoted, that power and awareness had quietly been realigned in favor of the one who had long been unseen, yet fully present, commanding attention through presence, clarity, and the strength of composure. Emily Whitman's hands paused midair, her fingertips brushing the edge of the ornate table as realization swept across her face, a subtle tension threading through her posture as she slowly understood the depth of Lisa Johnson's insight, the precision with which she had uncovered the hidden clause and the implications it carried, and the room seemed to contract around them, each mirrored wall and polished surface reflecting the stunned expressions of the socialites who had assumed certainty and control. Lisa held the folder lightly in one hand, her other hand resting calmly at her side, eyes steady on Emily, voice quiet yet carrying the weight of undeniable truth as she walked slowly to the center of the room, giving each guest a chance to absorb the shift, to recognize that the narrative of authority, once assumed immutable, was now balanced on the clarity, knowledge, and poise of a young woman previously overlooked. The guests leaned forward subtly, the soft rustle of fabric and faint clearing of throats marking the room's tension, while the chandeliers caught glimmers of light that danced across Lisa's determined expression, illuminating the calm precision of her presence, her words resonating in the hushed space, each syllable measured, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Emily's gaze followed the movements of Lisa with a mixture of awe and uncertainty, her composure faltering as she registered the full impact of the information presented, the potential consequences, and the shift in authority that had been orchestrated with quiet mastery, the elegance of knowledge combined with unshakable calm, challenging every assumption of control in the room. As Lisa finished outlining the clause, highlighting the precise points that altered ownership and influence, the room held an extended pause, the soft echo of shoes on marble, the distant hum of the chandelier lights, the stillness of guests frozen in collective recognition amplifying the gravity of the moment. And in that suspended interval, Emily's expression softened, her posture loosening slightly as she absorbed the truth and the undeniable correctness of Lisa's observation, the initial amusement, the smirk, replaced by an unspoken acknowledgment of authority earned through insight rather than privilege. Lisa's calm presence, measured tone, and unwavering gaze held the room in a suspended state, each guest attuned to the transformation in dynamics, the subtle realignment of power, while Emily, now silent, nodded minutely, a gesture of concession and realization, the first sign of acknowledgment that the young waitress had shifted the room's balance and commanded respect not through wealth or status, but through intellect, timing, and quiet confidence, leaving every attendee, every mirrored reflection, and every crystal prism in the ballroom bearing witness to a profound recalibration of authority, a quiet but definitive recognition that the narrative had changed irreversibly, and that Lisa Johnson stood at the center, poised, steady, and fully seen. Emily Whitman stepped back, her posture easing as she absorbed the magnitude of Lisa Johnson's composure and insight, a quiet acknowledgment passing through her eyes as she finally understood that the young waitress had acted not out of defiance, but from a place of clarity and integrity, and the room seemed to settle around them, the tension that had gripped every guest now dissolving into a collective realization of respect. Lisa held the folder loosely at her side, her expression calm yet radiant, the soft glow of the chandeliers catching the edges of her features, illuminating a serene confidence that had grown from years of observation, diligence, and a quiet sense of purpose. The socialites murmured softly among themselves, adjusting their positions, their previous airs of superiority tempered by the undeniable competence displayed before them, and Emily's shoulders relaxed as she allowed herself the first small exhale since the confrontation began, the corners of her lips lifting slightly in a gesture of recognition, an unspoken apology, and an offer of reconciliation without words. Lisa's gaze moved across the room, noting the subtle nods, the shared looks, the soft smiles of approval that now rippled from guest to guest, each one acknowledging the moral and intellectual victory she had quietly earned, and the air itself seemed to hold a gentler quality, lighter, filled with the kind of silent admiration that only comes when truth and integrity shine in a space that had long been governed by privilege and assumption. Emily stepped closer, carefully, her tone measured and sincere as she spoke, acknowledging the accuracy of Lisa's observation, the courage it took to speak up in such a setting, and the value of her knowledge, the words carrying a weight of respect that transformed the atmosphere completely, while Lisa nodded, accepting the gesture with quiet dignity, understanding that her role in the mansion had shifted, not through confrontation, but through demonstration of principle, skill, and unwavering calm. Guests watched the exchange, the energy of the room subtly changing, the balance of authority now shared, the previous hierarchies softened by the undeniable truth presented, and as Emily handed a small, ornate key to Lisa, a symbolic gesture of trust and recognition, the collective attention of the room centered on her, the young waitress who had turned observation and careful judgment into authority and respect, the chandeliers overhead casting warm, refracted light across the polished marble floors, illuminating every subtle expression, every careful movement, every quiet heartbeat of realization. Lisa's hand closed gently around the key, a small but definitive acknowledgment of her new position, her eyes meeting Emily's once more with a steady, calm expression that communicated gratitude and understanding. And as she stepped toward the grand staircase, the soft click of her shoes on the marble echoing through the hushed room, every guest remained still, witnessing the quiet transformation, the moral and intellectual triumph, and the subtle shift in power that had taken place not with anger, not with force, but through patience, clarity, and the unwavering confidence of a young woman who had been underestimated, yet had proven her worth and earned respect through action, insight, and the strength of character that illuminated the entire mansion with a sense of justice, recognition, and redemption. Lisa Johnson descended the grand staircase slowly, each step measured, her hand lightly grazing the polished mahogany railing as sunlight streamed through the tall windows, scattering soft patterns across the marble floors and reflecting off the crystal chandeliers above, bathing the room in a golden glow that seemed to celebrate the quiet triumph she had achieved. The mansion, vast and ornate, now felt different, alive with a subtle acknowledgment of her presence, every reflection, every polished surface capturing the poise, dignity, and unwavering confidence she had displayed. Guests and staff alike watched in respectful silence, the tension that had filled the room hours before now replaced by a deep, collective recognition of the moral and intellectual shift that had occurred, and Lisa moved with serene awareness, letting her gaze drift across the elegantly arranged tables, the gleaming silverware, and the attentive faces, each reflecting curiosity, admiration, and acknowledgment. Emily Whitman lingered near the center of the ballroom, her expression softened, her usual air of command tempered by an unspoken understanding that the young waitress had revealed a truth and exercised judgment in a way that demanded respect. And in that subtle exchange of glances, a bridge of acknowledgment was formed, bridging the gap between privilege and insight, authority assumed and authority earned. Lisa paused near the entrance to the adjoining gallery, letting the light catch the edges of the folder in her hand, illuminating the careful lines of her face, the steady rhythm of her breathing, and the serene certainty of her movements, while the soft murmur of admiration from a few guests hinted at the quiet satisfaction of witnessing a moment where fairness and clarity triumphed over assumption and status. The atmosphere held a sense of suspended reflection, the chandeliers sparkling gently, mirrors along the walls capturing fragments of expressions, the polished floors echoing the subtle rhythm of Lisa's footsteps as she continued through the room. Every motion a statement of composure, patience, and unshakable integrity. And as she reached the final step onto the marble landing, she turned briefly to survey the room one last time, noting the softened expressions, the subtle nods, and the quiet respect now evident in Emily Whitman's eyes. And with that glance, she carried with her the recognition of her own ability to influence and transform the space without confrontation, with intellect, clarity, and calm determination. The mansion seemed to exhale with her, the ambient light catching on crystal surfaces, the hush lingering in the corners, amplifying the profound shift that had taken place. A transformation not in the structure or the decor, but in the understanding of everyone present, a subtle yet undeniable recalibration of respect and authority that would echo in the minds of all who had witnessed it. And as Lisa stepped into the adjoining hall, the soft sound of her shoes on the marble echoing like a quiet drumbeat, the finality of the moment settled in, leaving behind a room forever changed by the poise, courage, and insight of a young woman whose presence had revealed that true authority comes not from wealth or status, but from clarity, integrity, and the quiet power of understanding.